these four chapters seem to have themes about them, which is in a kind of progression. So we move from humility into thinking about obedience, into thinking about freedom or liberty, and then finally thinking about detachment. So there's a kind of progression, but all of these, you can hear that they are so much embedded into the monastic rule of St. Benedict. It's all there, right in those tools for good works that we were looking at in the rule of St. Benedict, humility, obedience, which gives us freedom, and how we can be then we can enjoy what we have, but actually it doesn't own us. It has no power over us. So I'm just going to run through just in a kind of summary way of what each chapter kind of looks at. And then I've got some questions for you, which sort of pick up some of the themes from that so that you can have a chat. But of course, as I always say, bring your own, talk about what you want to talk about and what you have found interesting in these chapters. So the first is he really plunges into this whole notion of despair, and sees despair as arising when people have too much trust in their own abilities, in their own achievements, in their own spiritual progress, and then, of course, that failure and a continual sense of failure because one cannot be perfect all the time, and one doesn't always get what we want to. So that sort of sense of failure can lead us down into this spiral of despair or depression or however we want to describe it. Like all great spiritual writers, Merton is pointing to the great virtue of humility to sort of, be the antidote to despair, which obviously arises from pride, the first of the seven deadly sins. And because humility, what it does, it's not the kind of, always saying, oh, I'm no good, or running oneself down. That's not what he talks about of humility. But humility is the word humus, which is about the earth. So it's about being rooted. So it's having a really good understanding of your strengths and of your weaknesses, and knowing that actually we're all a bit of that, and living with the complexity and of ourselves and of other people, but also, eventually beginning to say, look, this is how I am. I take my weaknesses, I try to improve on my weaknesses, but this is how I am. And this is the person that God has made me. And to try and have that sort of, I guess it's a kind of self dignity, self-respect, understanding who we are. And if you remember, each time we've looked at these spiritual texts, there's always that central thing about self-awareness. So really looking at yourself in in the mirror. There's this really good book out at the moment. I think it's by a person called Peter Jones, and it's called Self-Help from the Middle Ages, I think. It's really good. So he basically goes through each of the seven deadly sins, but he expresses them in a really good sort of modern context and how they appear in modern life today. And it's really, really helpful. And I've just read the ones on pride and anger. I'm just looking now at sloth or acidia, which is a kind of, oh, and he's done envy too. So it's a really helpful book. So if you're interested, it's a really good one to sort of help you reflect on how modern life can actually, it doesn't really help us in many ways to look in the mirror. That actually all the seven virtues, he says, have become, oh, all the seven deadly sins have become the seven virtues of modernity, which is a really interesting thought. So that's the one about humility. Humility. Once again, he still has at the heart of his writing this sense of the false self and the true self. You know, how we can free ourselves from this false self. And one of the ways is the next chapter, which is about freedom and living under obedience. Now, of course, as a monk, Merton would completely know what it was like to have to live under obedience. And I guess all of us, in some sense, live under some kind of obedience. You know, to within a marriage, we've made vows. You know, when we sign a contract, we've said we will do something, so we live under the obedience of some of the promises that we have made. So for Merton, he really challenges, though, that modern concept that obedience is something that's limiting. It's not limiting. It depends who we give our obedience to. Okay. Now, for Merton, of course, the spiritual life, the obedience is given to God ultimately. And it's when we're obedient to the voice of God and God's will for us and for the world that actually we find a new kind of freedom. Which then moves us on into the whole idea of what is freedom, what is liberty, which he looks at in chapter 27. And here, again, he helpfully distinguishes between what is authentic freedom from just a mere independence. I can do what I want to do, sort of thing. Or the ability that you want to have to just completely live, I suppose, a sort of self-centered life. I want to be free. I want to do everything my way, you know. And obviously, it's very, particularly today, freedom can be tied up with having unlimited choices. And yet, I don't know about you, but I find burden. I'll go into a shop and I just want to buy a pair of jeans. All these different jeans, and there are different ones up there. And I just go, oh, can someone just give me a pair of jeans? Because actually, what's happened is that sense of freedom has actually, you know, it's confused us. It makes us feel burdened. It has actually reduced us into, you know, I'm now anxious about just wanting one pair of jeans. So Merton's really good about, you know, trying to hold that up and say, what actually is real freedom? And he says that a person, the free person, or the freer a person becomes spiritually, the less they're kind of dominated by, you know, the pride, the anxiety, the fear, the external pressures. So it's kind of just walking in and not worrying about these things. So liberty is therefore about being free inside. It's an inner condition, rather than a psychological state or political or social, where we are able to, you know, have what we want. And that leads us finally to detachment. So Merton describes detachment as the path that leads us towards freedom, actual inner freedom. It's that path that will help us. Detachment doesn't mean that we reject the world, or that we suppress anything that we feel or emotions. Rather, it means allowing our possessions, our ambitions, our pleasures, or even our spiritual consolations not to be the one in control. They're not in the driving seats of our hearts. Rather, detachment is where we can appreciate created things without clinging to them. And this freedom from detachment makes a deeper contemplation possible because the soul's no longer preoccupied with all the things that try to bolster up the false self, but can actually be free to enter into that sort of place, that interior space where it can know how much God um, loves them and where they can flourish themselves and have compassion towards others. So you can see how these four chapters sort of they sort of merge. Well, they don't merge, but they are all kind of actually related to one another. And it makes me wonder whether Merton sort of sat down and he wrote one, and then he wrote the other, and then he wrote the other, and actually they did form, a sequence that he was thinking a lot about the sort of the basic building blocks of the monastic life of humility and obedience, but what it would mean and what it means for the modern world of his time. And of course, we can have an opportunity then now to think about what do these mean for us today.